Welcome to another Ronel Talks Money show. Today we are going to talk a bit about costly mistakes that you can make when you are buying or selling a property. And quite often we are not really aware of all the things that we need to look out for, and later on it can actually cost you a lot of money to either change it or to adjust it. And today we have Abrie Snyman from Multiprof with us to discuss these kind of difficult topics with us that sometimes we just don't know about. And it's all about how do we educate ourselves about these important things that we need to know. But before I'm handing over to Abrie, I just want to remind you, please subscribe to the channel and remember to click on the link in the description where you can enter our monthly giveaway competition, where you can also win one of my books, Financially Fit and Wealthy, as well as some financial courses. So, Abrie, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ronel. It's nice to be with you. And the subject is close to my heart. We deal with the results of people not understanding all the final details on a regular basis in our office. And therefore, it's a pleasure to share it with everybody listening.
So, because it's things that you are not, the public out there, we are not dealing it with it on a daily basis, but it can really cost you a lot of money. So, Abrie, maybe you must just first tell us a little bit about Multiprof and what you do.
Yes, Multiprof Property Intelligence is a company that specializes in property information, basically. So we are a multidisciplined company doing consulting in various fields in property, from town planning. I'm a town planner myself, to architecture, building plans, sectional titles. And then under our umbrella, we do property valuations, property inspections, and various other fields in property. And my passion is to connect the dots between all the different professionals in the industry. And therefore, we deal with a vast amount of problems in our offices. And lots of them have to do with people not taking care when buying properties, and by listening to sellers and unfortunately property practitioners sometimes that don't always have the interest of the buyer at heart, but is more interested in commission.
Now, I can totally relate with that. And I mean, you hear so many horrible stories about people really having to spend a lot of money after the transaction. But you can maybe just from your experience share with us what are the biggest money mistakes that people are making when they are buying property.
Well, there's obviously different areas to look at when you ask that question and want to answer it. The bigger picture is obviously when you are not aware of what lies in the future of the area. Towns have a natural way of developing in certain areas and deteriorating in other areas. So locality, not only for the moment, but for the future, is obviously very important, especially if you do an investment and it's not where you want to live specifically. Over years, certain areas will increase in value and certain areas can deteriorate quite quickly, and you will definitely not get your money back at the end. Then on a micro scale, buying any property without doing due diligence on the property itself and making sure that you have all the legal requirements and legal documents in place can be very costly. What people do not understand always is the moment that the property transfer in your name, you become the owner of each and every problem that ever existed on that property. So if 4 owners before made some changes that's illegal, it is your problem now to deal with it. There is a bigger awareness lately on the consequences of not following procedures and having all the legal requirements met. And therefore, it is of utmost importance that when you are interested in a property, that you ask your property practitioner for all the legal documents related to the property. And if they can't give it to you or is not interested, then you can almost assume that there is a problem and that you might be buying into a problem property.
I think that is a scary thought in itself. But Abrie, you've mentioned now about developments in your area. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things that could happen within your area. And I mean, there we think about, they building a highway or a school just across your home or something that can potentially enhance your property value. But like you said, you can also lose a lot of value. So what are the typical things that you need to be aware of in terms of developments in your area? And how would you get to know these things? Because obviously people like you or working with these things on a daily basis, but for the public, how would you know about it?
Okay. It's not as difficult as it might seem. We specifically will talk about Tshwane now, where we operate from, but most of the metropolitan areas will have the same type of facilities. Now, it is a legal requirement for municipalities to have what we call a regional spatial development framework. Now, that framework is updated every 5 years with input from the public, and it's a document that will indicate what council will support in future in an area. So all major road changes, for instance, new highways and stuff, is indicated on that, sometimes many, many years ahead of time. But you will know somewhere in future, it might be 20 years or whatever from now, there is a possibility that a new road will be built. But on the micro scale, for each property, there is an indication in color, basically that will translate into a land use. So you'll be able to go to a property and see for that property, will council support, for instance, in future, higher densities for residential purposes? Will they support commercial properties? Will they look at mixed use developments? Or will it just be low density residential as most of us know it, with a density of about 25 units per hectare? It's all available on the Tshwane GIS system, and the same would be for Cape Town, and I'm sure for Durban and the bigger places as well. So if you go to the website of your the city where you are, you'll be able to get lots of those information. And if you don't understand exactly how it works, I recommend that you go to your local municipality and have a discussion with a town planner in that area, and they will either show you how to find it yourself on the GIS, or they will explain to you what lies in the future. If you just do that basic step, you can learn so much about not only your property that you're interested in, but also in the area in which you are developing, you develop or you want to buy a property. Yeah, so that's about the easiest way to have a good indication. Sometimes if you really find the experienced property practitioner, they'll be able to give you some information as well. If they are area bound, there's trends lately where property practitioners can work anywhere, sell anywhere. Of course, you will get a better service from somebody that knows the area and that work localized instead of somebody that tried to work all over the place.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely something that you should try to see how you can basically obtain all of this information, and it will just help you to make much better decisions. But then also, I think now during this COVID period, a lot more people are starting or basically converting into becoming entrepreneurs or starting maybe a side hustle on the side. And if I think about, if you start something at home or you buy a property with the intention to run business activities from that property, or even now if you think you need extra money, you're going to maybe build an additional flat or two, those kind of things. When will, or how would you know when will you require something like business rights or trade licenses, or maybe even rezoning of your land? How does that work?
Okay. The basic principle will be the same all over the country. You will have a zoning certificate to start off with. So that's one of the legal documents that we always ask people to obtain when they're interested in a property. A zoning certificate basically will give you an indication of what type of activities are allowed on the property, and then how much of those activities. So typically you will find that a normal dwelling house that we're discussing would be zoned residential 1, and typically you will be allowed only one dwelling house that is suitable for a family. The moment you go outside of that basic definition, one must really look at the specific council, the rules, the regulations. In Tshwane specifically, you are allowed to build one granny flat, not bigger than 50 square meters in general. And then they have you have the opportunity to have a business from home, and typically it would be an office type of activity, not bigger than 60 square meters, and you are not allowed to employ more than 2 employees, and then you're not allowed to put up big signage. So it is typically for the home undertaking. Typically, it would not be retail. You're not allowed to keep stock and stuff like that. So it is more for the professionals, basically, like a doctor or something, but not more than 2 assistants allowed. And the person that is doing the business must live on the property. So it's for your own dwelling or the property that you rent. You can't have a student living there and you run your business there. That would be illegal. In real life, often people would start other businesses fairly small as well. As long as you are not a nuisance and your neighbors are not affected, you will get away with it for quite a while. And in real life, again, it's often the way to go. But the moment you start to get deliveries and you get lots of clients that park in front of the gate of the neighbors, or there's noise, or children running around all over all the time, while people next door try to work, then you will run into problems, because council will react on complaints, and then you will have to either move your business, or they'll take you to court to stop you from doing the business. But again, it's important to make sure of the regulations in your specific town or city. But typically, it would be okay if it's not a nuisance and it is on small scale, and you live there. Most importantly, you must live on the property. Then, as we said, if you go to the Regional Spatial Development Framework, there will be areas where you can apply to rezone the dwelling house for business purposes or offices. But that's a different ball game, and can be very expensive. And that's only if you have an established business, or you're very sure that you're very soon going to have use of the whole property for business.
So clarify for us, if you want to buy a property with the intention to only run a business from there, sometimes I heard of stories where they told them they've got business rights and they bought the property, and then they in fact didn't have business rights. How can you just make sure that the property you want to buy does in fact have business rights?
Okay. It's a very valid question, and not always as easy as it seems. First thing that you need to obtain again is the zoning certificate. If the zoning certificate does not state business or whatever it is, then it is not rezoned. Only what's on the zoning certificate is what is valid. It may be that the person applied for a rezoning, it was still in process. They might have indicated that it will be approved, but up to the point where you have a zoning certificate that states all the things that you want to do, it is not suitable for that. Even in cases, especially earlier on, up to about 5 years ago, council would approve a rezoning and immediately change the zoning on the zoning certificate. But there will be conditions in the zoning certificate that you need to meet before you can exercise those rights. And that will include payment of bulk services or development contributions. It will be submitting new building plans, and then eventually obtaining a certificate of occupancy for the new land use. If you don't have those things, chances are very good that the process was only followed halfway, and that the last compliance part must still be done, and that can set you back a few R100,000. So you must again make sure that the rights is usable, not only approved, because that's only the first stage. If you have any doubt about that, it is a good idea to inquire with somebody knowledgeable, that they explain to you the systems, and that one get the information from council to confirm if the contributions was paid already. But basically, you need, if you have a certificate of occupancy for plans for the use that you want to do there, you should be fairly fine. So, for instance, if you want to use it for doctors' rooms, on the plans, it must state surgery room, reception, even though there may be plans for exactly what you have. It will say entrance hall, dining room, living room, if it was a house before. And that is an indication that it haven't been followed through, because you're only allowed to use a room for what it is indicated on the building plan. So the fact that no changes have been made to the structure doesn't mean that you have an approved building plan if the use have changed.
Glad we are having you on the show today, because there's so much information and things that you all actually need to be aware of. And the man on the street, I think we are not aware of all these things that we actually need to tick off when we venture in these kind of activities. But then also for existing residential properties, if you now want to do some improvements to your property, and I'm thinking of things like maybe a lapa, a pool, a carport, windy houses, those kind of things, how would you know when do you need to adjust your building plans for it, or when is it not required?
The National Building Regulations is quite clear that building plans are required for all permanent and temporary structures. There's huge misunderstandings about certain things that people say, but this is temporary and I can move this and therefore I don't need a plan. The National Building Regulations is clear that you need, so technically you need almost for everything. There is exceptions for minor building works, and that is determined by the specific municipality. In a place like Tshwane, it's almost non-existing. And typically, even if you want to claim that it's a minor building work, you typically need to apply to have your structure declared too small or whatever for a building plan. So in a way, you must submit a building plan for them to say, okay, you don't need to submit a building plan. But the biggest issues normally that we found in our office that creates bigger problems is things like swimming pools. All swimming pools need building plans. Also indicate the safety measures associated with a pool. Carports, most carports need building plans in Tshwane, including shade netting. Then the next big culprit is louver decks in complexes. People say, but it can open, and council say, but it can close. So because it can close, it is a structure and it will also account for coverage. Then a big problem, and there's lots of misunderstanding about it in Tshwane specifically, but in other municipalities as well, is Wendy houses. A Wendy house need a building plan. And very important to note that even when building plans are approved for Wendy's, it's only approved for storage purposes. It's never approved for somebody to stay in it. It is not suitable for human habitation. It doesn't comply to any of the regulations as far as insulation or fire safety is concerned. And it can jeopardize, for instance, a claim if there's a fire that starts in a Wendy and your house burned down. It is possible that the insurance company will not pay your claim, because your insurance would normally state that you are insuring a brick and tile structure. So the risk of a house with bricks and tiles or whatever burning down is quite low. And therefore your premium is determined by that low risk. So if you now allow electricity into a windy house, or in winter somebody stays there and they put on a heater and the fire starts there and the house caught fire, the insurance will say, but you have created a risk that is much higher than the risk that you are insured for. And so because of the Wendy, you might still have an outstanding bond of 2 million Rand and nothing to show for it. And you will even have to pay to have all the rubble removed from your house that burned down. So that is a big one. The biggest problem I think that one must be on the lookout for when buying property is LAPAs. They have the same risks as Wendy's, just much higher risk, because often people will build in braais with chimneys that goes through the thatch. The thatch is not treated and is a very big fire hazard. Except for that, often they are built in a position where there's municipal services running, there's servitudes registered, where, for instance, the sewage pipes is laid for council, and in those areas you're not allowed to build anything, and council will not approve building plans for any structures in those servitudes, and therefore once it's built, it needs to be demolished or moved, and that can be very expensive. And often people will be interested in a property specifically because they want this entertainment area, only to be told later on that, listen, it needs to be demolished, and that can really be a big loss for a buyer. And all of those things would have been prevented if the buyer insisted on all the legal documents, including the building plans for the structures. So that is the biggest problem areas that we have with building plans. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misleading information that is given to potential buyers or owners. I always tell the story that if you want to build a LAPA and you get the thatching company out for a quote and you ask if you need building plans, they will ask you what size it is. And if you say, well, let's make it about 5 by 4, 20 square meters, they will tell you, yo, you are so lucky. You know, if it was 25 square meters, you need a building plan, but it's small, so you don't need. If you tell them you really want something substantial like 70 square meters, they will tell you, yo, it's your lucky day. If it was 75 square meters, you need a building plan. Of course, the contractor wants to get in and out and get his money and leave you with the problem. And then, unfortunately, when you sell the property, you will leave that problem to the new owner. Lately, banks insist on a regular basis that plans must be provided before they would do the mortgage on the property. And even more important, your buyers are becoming much more informed. So the idea that the seller is just going to move his problem to a next person is not happening as often. And also with the new Property Practitioners Act, there's a much bigger responsibility onto property practitioners to ensure that buyers don't have financial losses because of the transaction. We don't know how that will pan out in real life once it's applicable, but yeah, be aware of all the pitfalls that you can have when buying a property. Rather, make sure, get the information, get an outside property specialist involved. Lately, it's also, I think, the thing of the future where properties will not be sold without a property inspection being done by an independent company. It might cost you 5,000 Rand, even if you're the buyer, but it can save you even up to 1 million Rand eventually by making sure that everything is legal. We deal with cases where the moment the transfer took place, the buyer lost 1 million Rand because of structures and sometimes whole units that needs to be demolished that was built illegally.
No, that is definitely quite scary. And yeah, I think you hear these stories all the time. So it is definitely something that you need to be aware of. But Abrie, you've mentioned about occupational certificates. So maybe you can also just elaborate a little bit more about it. What is it? When is it needed?
Okay. The occupational certificate is the final document that is issued by the council via the building inspector after any construction has taken place. So I think it's about since the late 70s, council issues certificates of occupancies. And basically that is a declaration by council that the building was erected along the rules and regulations and according to a specific building plan, and therefore that the structures is safe and according to regulations. A building plan basically indicates to council what you want to erect. And therefore, they will look at things like the building lines, the servitudes, the structure you want to build, let's say the size of the trusses for your roof, and make sure that everything will be safe, and they will insist on an engineer taking responsibility for it. And as the dwelling or the structure is erected, along the way, the building inspector will come and visit the site. Firstly, he will check the foundations and see if they are the right size and if they are at the right place, if it is as indicated on the building plan. And along the way, the building inspector will come out a few times, and then eventually, before you're allowed to move in, and if it's a new house, before they will give you electricity, you need to get the certificate of occupancy from the council, and that certificate will be valid forever and ever until you make any changes to the property. For new additions, you need to go through the same procedure again. Get building plans approved and then get the building inspector to inspect it. What very few people know is that a newly approved building plan is only valid for 12 months. Within those 12 months, if you don't get a building inspector to come out to the site and basically activate the plan will be null and void. So if you get a plan from a seller without the occupation certificate, it might be that plan is null and void in total. Now, the danger of not using or not getting a copy of the certificate of occupancy is because people don't really stick to the building plan when they build. 2 case studies that we dealt with. The one is a property where the owner had extended his kitchen. And fortunately, the buyer insisted on the building plans. And then when he realized there was no plans, he appointed a draftsperson. And as soon as the draftsperson started with measuring, he said, but, you know, we have a problem here. You have extended the kitchen over the municipal sewer. So it needs to be demolished. You can't get it approved. But the owner already sold the property, so he told the draftsperson, make the drawing of the house as it is, with the extended kitchen. But on your site, just move the whole house by a meter, so that it seems like it's out of the... Now, they submitted that to council, and council look at the plan for what they intend building, because that's what the building plan is. So they see, well, it's not in the servitude area, so we can approve it. And they did approve it. So you had a plan that's approved that have no meaning. But if you just give that to the new buyer, you'll be happy, because that was a condition in the OTP, and he have his approved building plan. Once you get the building inspector out and he see that this is not a representation of what's on the stand, it will just be null and void. So by not having the inspector coming out and doing the inspection and getting all the certificates to issue the certificate of occupancy, the building plan on its own can really have no value at all. It can just be misleading and give you the false impression that you have a legal building. Yeah, that's one very serious one. We have another one now on a very, very expensive property, whereby an addition was done, and this person bought the property years ago like that. Now that she wants to sell it, and they need to update the sectional title plan, they realized that a portion of this structure was built over the boundary onto a street zoned piece of property that was never developed, and it can cost thousands of hundreds of thousands to legalize that structure eventually. And although the building plan indicate that the plan is built up to the fence, the builder just went ahead and moved it by another meter or so. That is now creating huge problem.
It's a lot that you need to know, and I think that is why it is so important, like you said, to actually get professionals involved to help you make these kind of decisions. Because I think of ourselves, we also bought a property and we have received our electricity certificate, but afterwards we had lots of problems with the electricity, and it probably costed us more than 50,000 just to get the electricity to be kind of in a decent kind of manner. But so what can you share with us in terms of electricity certificates? What is required, and how would you know that that whole inspection was actually properly done?
Yeah, again, a very tricky question. I think one of the things that create a problem is the fact that people do not always understand what the electrical certificate is. Basically, it certifies that the installation is safe. And therefore, it does not necessarily include all things like, for instance, the stove. The stove is not at all, the appliance does not form part of the COC. So what the electrician is supposed to do is check that all the plugs are working, that all the wires are safe, that all the trip switches work, that that in general, it complies to all the electrical regulations. But for instance, if you have an extension plugged into a plug and the plug is working, it's not necessary part of the COC that the extension must be safe. So, because that's not the installation. Unfortunately, again, there is a lot of COCs issued that is not really worth the paper they're written on. And although you're supposed to have all the names and the numbers and whatever, it's seldom checked. And therefore, again, it is worthwhile when you're serious about the problem to get a second opinion. Although there might be a COC that's given to the attorneys or whatever to comply with the regulations, it's not a guarantee that it was issued properly. And that's true for many things in many places, but South Africa perhaps more. A lot of things are done fraudulently, or everybody's in cahoots to just sell the property and get commission, and then the buyer is stuck with it. So yeah, there's unfortunately not an easy solution, but getting second opinions, it might have, in your case, it might have cost you another R1,000 to get a second opinion from an independent person that is not part of the cartel almost. And at that point, it's easy to still tell the seller, listen, these needs to be fixed. Once it's transferred in your name, for you then to take them to court or tell them it was fraudulent, it's not really worthwhile. So that should be done before the transfer takes place.
Now, refer to get an independent opinion. Who would those people typically be? Would it be people like yourselves, or how would you know where to find an independent person who is qualified to really check all of these things for you? Because I think even about building plans, I think a lot of us, we don't have the knowledge to, even if they give us a building plan, to really kind of know all of these things and figure it out. So who would typically be those people?
Yeah, well, our company, Multiprof Property Intelligence, we have a division that do property inspections. It would be inspections of properties before you buy it, for instance, whereby we will check each and everything. And if in doubt, the COC, we can also get an independent electrician in to check the certificate, basically. So yeah, we can assist with that. With inspections, we also deal with rental inspections. Obviously, your in and out inspections, that is very important. If you invest in a property to rent out, it is important that when your tenant move in, you have documented the condition of the unit or the flat, and it's done in a way where you can, when he moves out, you can have a comparative investigation done with a document that's stating where you can see what have changed and what the person that rented will be responsible for as far as cost to bring the unit back to its original state. So yeah, having a property inspection done is, I think, more and more the way to go. It's your biggest investment that you'll ever make, and spending some money or insisting that the seller spend the money, I think is worthwhile. If somebody is not prepared to have the property inspected, then there might be a very good reason for it. and it might be the right thing to walk away from the property until you find something that you know have been inspected by an independent person for your own peace of mind.
And I think it's also one of those things where it will probably cost you a little bit of money, but it will save you lots of money over the longer term. So rather just invest that bit of money and rather have it checked out by people who are experts who can really help you to make the best possible decision. But Abrie, I just want to also let us touch a bit on sectional titles. I know there's quite often different kind of rules and regulations and things that people also need to be aware of. And we can probably do a whole show on it, but maybe you can just kind of briefly tell us what are the things that we need to be aware of.
Okay. Yeah, it's really a can of worms, and there is a lot to know and a lot to understand. Technically, I think the most important thing to understand about sectional title is no matter what anybody tells you, and it's typically the property practitioner that will tell you that, the reality is that in sectional title, you buy the inside of a unit and the undividable share of the common property. So technically, the middle of the wall on the outside of your unit, what's inside is yours. What is outside is common property. So that includes what people refer to as my garden, my carport, my lapa, anything outside of the middle line of your unit is common property. Technically, you're not allowed to even hang anything onto the outside of your unit because it's not yours. The roof is not yours, under the floor is not yours, and therefore you can't paint the roof the color you want, you can't change windows, all of those things, because the outside belongs to the body corporate. There's rules and regulations that govern sectional title, and important to take note of the rules that would prevent you from having animals or from parking your car anywhere else except in the garage. Make sure that you get all the documentation and that you understand what it means. I can compare any sectional title basically with something like a franchise. So you buy in a sectional title with the rules. It's not if it suits you or not. The rules have been established either in the rules and regulations, the sectional title rules, or for the complex itself. It's possible for a complex to make their own rules as long as it fits into what is fair, and therefore you need to obtain copies of that because you buy it with the rules. It's like if you buy a wimpy, there's certain rules that comes with it. You can't decide in a month's time, red is not my color, so I'm just to change everything to blue. The same is applicable in sectional title. You are bound by the rules of the complex, and the complex is not going to fit into you. You must know up front that you can live with the rules in the complex, and that include that if you have a 2-bedroom, that's a 2-bedroom. The idea is not that you can just add on whatever you want. Anything that is added onto a sectional title unit, if you don't change the sectional title plans, become common property. So in most of the complexes, if you build a little splash pool for yourself, in your garden, it is for the use of the whole complex. You can't keep people away from common property, and except where exclusive use areas are registered in advance, everything outside of the units is common property. And we had a case where a woman wanted to have a birthday party for a 10-year-old son, and she walked through the complex, found the nicest garden, and she had the birthday party in the nicest garden in the complex, and it is legal. There is nothing you can prevent do to prevent somebody utilizing common property, and not the trustees, not the police, not the scorpions. Nobody can remove the party goers from what you thought was your garden. Again, the fact that the property practitioner or estate agent told you, this is your garden, this is your lapa, if it's not in writing or you can prove it, it's not reflected on the sectional title plans, it's not yours, it is common property.
If you wake up the next morning and you see all the neighbors in your swimming pool, then you shouldn't be surprised. It can actually be legal.
Yes, then you know you should next time wear your costume when you swim.
Exactly. I think, Abrie, that's why we have you on the show, to tell us all of these things so that we know. Abrie, I think you have shared so much valuable information. And I just want to last question to you for today's show. I mean, you have so much experience and knowledge, and you obviously see these things happening on a daily basis. But what tips would you leave the viewers with when they want to buy or sell a property? What are the important things that they really need to know about, and then that they need to check, almost like a little checklist?
Yes. The first thing that I would recommend is that you always make use of a property practitioner that is willing to give you all the information that we discussed today. Unfortunately, as we said, not all property practitioners have the experience or the interest to really do the homework about the property that they are selling. And therefore, the basic documents that one should insist on is, of course, approved building plans, approved certificate of occupancy that reflects all the structures on the property. So only when you have a building plan, a certificate of occupancy that refers to all the structures, you have a legal property. There's also another important document that we call it the Surveyor General Diagram that indicate the borders of your property. It often happens that the boundary walls or the fence is not in the correct place. So you might see this big garden. In fact, some stage in the past, an owner have moved the fence to include some road reserve or some ESCOM servitude area, and you think that's what you buy, but that basically belongs to council or somebody else. So when you get a Surveyor General Diagram, it will give you the size and the shape of the property as well. Then we would recommend that you insist on a property inspection done by an independent company to check each and everything, including the building plans and the buildings according to the building plan. I personally also think it is worthwhile getting a professional valuation done of the property. Unfortunately, if you ask property practitioners and you ask a few of them, you will get a wide variety of values. And I think it's good peace of mind to get a professional valuer, especially if you plan to invest in the property and you want to sell it again, because we all know you make money by buying a property at the right price, not necessarily selling it at a better price. So if you overpay for the property because of bad advice, or you just like the property so much, then you can lose money instead of making money. It's always good advice, I think, when you invest in property for investment and not to stay there, not to get emotionally involved in the property. The fact that you like it, that it's beautiful, whatever, doesn't mean it's a good investment, because you might have very peculiar taste, and it would not appeal to lots of other people, or it might be impractical for somebody else to rent. I think if you get those documents, you get a property inspection, you get an independent valuer, you are on the right track. When you're in sectional title, of course, you need to also get, except for the building plans, you need to get the sectional title plans to know what you're buying. You need to get the management rules and the conduct rules. And you must understand that making additions will be costly if possible. Often in complexes, it's not really possible to extend it because all the rights have been used already, and you don't have additional coverage to build more carports. So you need to buy a property that suits your needs, or that you think will be rentable as is, without having to add additional structures on it.
I want to thank you for just sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom with us today. And it was such valuable information. And I think the viewers will agree with me. Buying or selling a property is probably your most expensive transaction in terms of money that you will probably do in your whole lifetime. So it's much better to be educated, to get the right people involved, and make sure that you make the correct decisions so that it doesn't cost you a lot of money over the long run. So Abrie, thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to share Abrie's details in the description below. So you're welcome to connect with them. And when you want to buy or sell a property, get them involved, let them help you to not lose money or to not make costly mistakes when buying or selling a property. And then I want to remind you again, remember to subscribe to the channel and also enter the monthly giveaway competition on the link in the description field. So I hope you have received a lot of value, and then I will see you again at the next Ronel Talks Money show.
Thank you very much.